Hello, everybody. It's Marianne Bailey with the Hip Senior Podcast. Today, we are talking about grief. To be specific, we're talking to Kevin O'Connor, who is here with us. Kevin, welcome.
Hi.
And he is the author of Two Floors Above Grief, a memoir of two families in the unique place we called home.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to our dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you wrote this book. We've got it on the Hip Senior for everybody, and we're going to show everybody the
Great.
book here in just a few minutes. But I want
Wonderful.
to take the chance for you to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about you, and tell a little bit about Two Floors Above Grief, why you wrote it, and then we want people to have the opportunity to go check it out for themselves.
Yeah, sure. Great.
All right.
Thanks for this opportunity. Yeah, the book's been published about 18 months. I started writing it about 3 years ago. I'm a self-published author, so I found ways to get my book published on my own, which is true of many authors nowadays. Well, the book
Isn't that
is
great about modern technology these days? Allows a lot of people to do a
we've
lot of
got
things
some
that they couldn't do.
options, and for those in your audience who are thinking about writing and want to do it, there's plenty of online coursework for people to provide a guide to how to get your story on paper and lots of support out there. So I recommend people look into that if they're interested in writing. The inspiration for the book came from shortly after my birth in 1950. I was the son of and the nephew of two funeral directors who owned a funeral home in Elgin, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. And when I was born in 50, they brought me home. That was my bedroom there above the funeral home for the 22 years of my life until I
For
moved
the
out after
foreseeable
college.
future.
So that was there. And just so the book is a collection of stories. I just based it on themes that I was able to put together. And the themes came from another part of the book is something a lot of seniors would relate to. The book is based on family letters that were written within my family, starting in the 1930s up through the 70s. I have about 700 pages of letters that were saved, written in all different kinds of fashion. And so I refer to those letters. And so it's the authentic words of the characters that are in the memoir. When I'm thinking of something in a particular theme, I'll pull a section of the letter and quote that letter verbatim. So it provides for me a connection to the family that I'm talking about, but also an offshoot of the book that's happened. And it has been people's appreciation for reading about old letters. What do you do when you find them in your attics? What do you do when you want to make sense of all this stuff and give it life and not just throw it away? So that's another offshoot of the book that's happened based on the research that I did and how I put the book together. But the book itself just is like a collection of stories. It's not so much about the clients who came to the funeral home. Very little is said about that. It's more about how my families, two families, my mom and my dad, my two brothers and I, and my aunt, my uncle, and my three cousins all lived in the same house. So that's why it's about two families. And we lived in this old Victorian house, which is really one of the characters of the story, just talking about the house itself and how it was repurposed into a funeral home and apartments. I think a lot of the people in the Hip Senior Network will appreciate the history part of the book. Yeah, from 1950. Even my parents were married in the 30s, and my aunt and uncle were married in 1930. So I have tidbits of history from the 30s all the way up to the 70s, and have benchmarks of who was president at the time or what music was popular, what singers were popular. So to connect with senior readers, I pepper the book through those kind of connections.
So we have a lot of caregivers that are part of the Hip Senior as well. This book's relative to them too, as well, though.
Oh, yeah. In fact, there's a part of the book. I was a caregiver for my mom. She passed away in 2010. For a period of time, I was her caregiver. So I tell stories about my caregiving and things, situations she and I got into. Yeah, we did have the help of an aide as well, but situations I had the opportunity to be involved in because I had retired from my role as a school principal and educator and was able to provide on-site assistance for her in her apartments and help find places for her. In terms of our audience and what some of our audience is doing in caring for their own families, there are some chapters in there about my dad and my mom and the interactions I had with them and my aunt and uncle in terms of caregiving and what we in our generation do for the ones that are older than us.
So you live above this funeral home all of your younger
Yeah.
life. You do not go into the funeral industry,
Mm-mm.
go into education. What led you in that direction? Where along the line did you say, you know what, this isn't for me. I don't want to be a funeral director. I don't want to follow in the family line of this. I want to do education. I want to be involved in
Sure.
education. Where did that start?
There's a couple of factors here. One is that neither my dad or my uncle put pressure on myself or my brothers or my cousins to be part of the business.
Okay.
Their theory, even though they had built this business up and were invested in it, they always wanted us to find our own way and to do what we wanted to do. And there was never anything that I felt from them that said I had to do this. Yes, we had plenty of exposure to what the business was about, and we helped and we did things and helped in whatever way we knew or were recruited to do by them. So the experiences I had certainly let me know about the business, but it was that idea that my father and my mom, my aunt and uncle said, no, you go to college or you do what you want to do, whether you want to go to college or pursue a trade or whatever it is you want to do. So for me, I started getting involved in education when I was an undergrad at Loyola Chicago in the 60s and 70s. And then I just kept pursuing that angle and went to California, Berkeley to get my teaching certificate and start teaching. And this year I'm celebrating 50 years as an educator. So 50 years ago this month, I
Nice.
started my first teaching job. And actually, teaching is very similar in some ways to the death care industry. It's very service oriented, very people oriented,
Right.
it's caregiving as well. It was, as I look back on it now, it was a nice connection for me.
Yeah, I'm sure it helped you be more empathetic and
Oh,
understanding
yeah.
towards people's needs as an educator. Not only the
Oh,
children
yeah.
that you're working with, but their parents as well as
Oh, yeah. No, I attribute that to the influence of my aunt, uncle, and mom and dad. Plus, this being immersed in this business and from an observational standpoint, but also whatever my parents found a way for us to help, whether it was setting up flowers or greeting people at the door or getting on my bike to run errands around the neighborhood to help the families that was the client. So that was just part of it was an unspoken expectation, but it was just something that we did.
right.
And I think for me, that led perfectly into what I pursued professionally.
Your book's out. I'm sure
Mhm.
you're promoting your book and we're on this podcast together, promoting it as well. But are there other areas that you're working with as far as grief counseling or grief
Mhm.
work? Where is this book taking you to?
Oh, interesting and great question. And through the context and the relationships I developed since the book was published, I've been able to learn more about there is a wealth of information about grief. Now that we have the opportunities of the internet, there's so much more available there and an acceptance of grief that there wasn't there during the time in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when my dad and uncle were running the business. It was more unspoken at the time. And it probably wasn't even seen as a mental health issue. It was just something that you did, you had the funeral and you moved on. But nothing was in my recollection and in nothing was done. So what I've been pursuing since the book was published is developing an identity that I call myself the Grief Navigator. And I have that moniker on Instagram that carries over to Facebook. What I do is, as the Grief Navigator, just collecting all different things that I find on social media that have to do with grief. And then I'm navigating people to those sites. So I'm not a grief counselor. Although I think that the years I spent growing up in the business gives me a little different perspective about grief than others
Right.
might have. But my role that has evolved with the book and in terms of the audience here we have on Hip Senior is what do I do in this situation? Or how do I get ready for this? Or how do I experience even, I'm thinking of pet grief.
Huh.
And I've got my dog sitting behind me and she's experiencing congestive heart conditions. So there's that element of pre-grief because we know
Right.
something's going to happen, but we don't know when. And how do you deal with that? Even with my own situations with my parents, with their illnesses, there was pre-grief. I'm not even sure 12 years ago or 40 years ago when my dad was passing on, did we have a word that's called pre-grief or
I've never heard it
anticipatory
before. I've never heard.
or anticipatory grief? When you know something's going to happen, you don't know when, but you start to get those feelings of loss and letting go. even before the person or the pet passes on. Grief happens in so many different places, which it's not just the death or passing on. It could be through estrangement in the family. It could be moving from one house to the other. There's grief in downsizing. There's grief in leaving a job either willingly or unwillingly. So grief comes into so many aspects of our life. So what I'm doing now as the Grief Navigator is I look each day and I'm involved each day in what's available for people. And then I post something or I let people know either through the other social media sites, either LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Or I also have a newsletter. I have a website and a newsletter that comes out once a week. So I let people know about what I'm finding and the resources they can go to. That's where the book has taken me at this point. And I'm working on a second book too. There is a movement in the UK to inculcate grief education into the elementary and high schools and to have that mentioned or part of their curriculum, unlike what we experienced in your generation or my generation where it wasn't discussed.
Right.
Now they want it to be openly discussed because it's really a life skill. It's part of life.
Yeah.
And we want to be each of us and honoring everybody's different approaches and respecting that, but knowing that grief, like death, isn't anything we can escape from. And if we can find out ways to embrace grief, then we're going to be healthier for it.
Yeah. As you were saying that, it dawned on me that you're right. This weird divide line between Gen X and seniors and then millennials and Gen Z, right? It's almost divided in the middle as to where the Gen Z and the millennials, they're all about their emotions and how they're feeling. And that's fine because it's healthier that they understand how they're feeling and what those emotions are than keeping it all bottled up. We learned in the 70s and below. And I was thinking age group and up. And there needs to be people in the world that are saying, it's healthy to talk. It's okay to show your emotions. It's healthy and okay to talk to your grandkids and your children about how you're feeling or how they're feeling. Let them express how they're feeling, but also encouraging your friends and your family that are older. Hey, it's okay to show me that you're upset or whatever.
Mhm.
Because we, like I said, we learned that it wasn't. I remember
Yeah.
being
Mhm.
upset about stuff, and my mom would say, don't talk to your dad the minute he comes home. We bottled everything up and we kept things to ourselves and we figured out how to deal with it. So I love that there are emotions that are teaching the younger generation and
And
teaching them also of how to communicate with seniors and Gen X. It's okay to go to them and talk to them and teaching those seniors and Gen X how to communicate back with them. All right. We've talked about my certificate that we're starting, right? That
Mhm, mhm.
enables these conversations and communications between different generations.
Yeah, that's a great point. Something that happened with the book that I wasn't expecting or even marketing towards was an interest in the book among teens and young adults. And so on some of the rankings on Amazon, it'll come up as a top 10 for young adults. Part of the reasons that I'm determining through other contacts I have, but why are I appreciating the interest is they're interested in the aspect of grief. They're also interested in the idea, how did people communicate before internet? Oh, what are letters? Or how do you write a letter? Because so much the book is based on letters. And the other thing that seems to be appealing to the young adults and teens is the of the setting of the Victorian house, and it looks a little gothic, and the idea that families actually lived there in the funeral home. It's something that they don't conceive of. So it's been a welcome audience in terms of bridging that gap between 30 and older up to, and then now knowing there's an interest in the stories among younger people as well.
Because we had a TV show called 6 Feet Under.
Oh, great show.
That's almost your story, right? It's a family
Mhm, mhm.
living
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
funeral home. The real 6 Feet Under story.
Yeah, in fact, some of the reviews that come across on Amazon say, hey, this is the real 6 feet under family. People say, how does your family like them? I said, probably not quite as quirky, but certainly the idea, even the setting of that funeral home and that TV show it's like they came into our house and filmed there. It's very similar. But the whole concept of how does a family incorporate themselves into that world that they portrayed in 6 feet under, it was very similar to how I grew up. Yeah. I never felt that it detracted from my friendships And yet I didn't walk around town saying, I'm the son of an undertaker. It was just known,
Right.
like I knew my friends whose father might have been a pediatrician or the plumber or the appliance repair person or whatever they were doing. We knew that. It was just another job that people had. And I did have somebody remark to me this week, somebody that grew up in the neighborhood, I wanted to come to your house more often, but I never knew which door to knock on. That's something I've just learned this week. There was probably 5 different doors on the outside that somebody might go. Our friends knew where to go. They knew the back steps and how to get upstairs and stuff. We never had trick-or-treaters at our house, partly because
Because it was a
people didn't know
funeral.
not that we weren't ready. We had candy and things like that, but we got very few trick-or-treaters.
Oh, that could have been a really fun scenario, though.
We certainly went out and trick-or-treated, and they helped us get ready with our costumes and put us out onto the street and did our trick-or-treating and stuff. And we brought our things home and sifted through the booty and checked it all out. But there wasn't a lot of action from the other side. But it was an interesting, like I said in the subtitle, a unique place we called home. Sometimes my dad would need pallbearers for a certain funeral and he'd say, hey, call your friends, get over here. I'll pay them each $5 a piece. And here, I've been out of high school 55 years. Some of the friends still talk about, hey, I remember when your dad called me and we were doing the pallbearing thing. And we might have been the only ones at the funeral, depending on that particular situation. So that's why he would recruit us. And then he would educate us a little bit about who the person was and how we were showing care for him, even though there was nobody else at the funeral.
Yeah,
So,
being respectful of that, because even in
mhm.
death, when people are alone, they do deserve respect.
Yes, and my dad and uncle were very good at that. And then that he would recruit me and my friends to provide that kind of support that nobody else was. So
Nice. All right, Kevin.
with the book as a vehicle, I come to book clubs. So if people in the network here have book clubs, I do virtual book clubs with them and then we can work. Any of the listeners here that want me to come to their book club, I have a whole book club guide that I can provide them beforehand. So there's that too, and they can find that out through my website.
If you go to thehipsenior.com and just type in Kevin in the search thing, it'll pop up right away. You just
Wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
and then
Thank
there
you.
is a link that says details in there. You click on that and that'll take you to his book in Amazon as well. All you have to really remember is the Hip Senior, and Kevin's profile in there will take you to all of his links.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Marianne.
Yeah, we're so happy. You've been part of the Hip Senior for about a year now. And it's always fun having these conversations with you and seeing where you're going with this. I love the Grief Navigator title that you're encompassing with that as well. And I love that in England that they're doing that initiative as well. So I probably have some contacts that I can hook you up with in that arena.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much for being part of the Hip Senior podcast, watching Kevin and I converse and talk about his book, 2 Floors Above Grief. Kevin, I wish you all the best with your book. Everybody, if you have any questions or whatever and you need some help, feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you with Kevin. If you want an introduction to Kevin and maybe he can come be on your book club or part of your business, let me know. We'll hook you up. Everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day. Kevin, thanks again. I appreciate you being here.